Did you know that Bilbo volunteered to take the ring to Mount Doom? Or that Boromir wanted Aragorn to return to Gondor as king, and Aragorn himself was keen on the idea? Or that Merry and Pippin never eavesdropped on the Council of Elrond? Well, if you have never read the books, then these are just a few examples of the many changes that Peter Jackson made to Tolkien's Council of Elrond. In the books, this chapter is the starting point for the epic saga that is The Lord of the Rings. Up until this point, Frodo has not understood that his assignment would carry him further than Rivendell, and the Council is also where we meet the rest of the Fellowship. It comes more than halfway through the book, and in the books, it's a natural point for Tolkien to recap the reader on everything that has happened outside of the Hobbit's point of view, as well as fill us in on some Middle-earth lore that is important to the story of the ring. If you're listening to the audiobook, this chapter alone takes over 2 hours, and according to Tolkien, the Council takes all day, with Elrond speaking on the history of the ring for hours. Whereas in the movie, we get a much more brief version of events that takes place in one 8-minute scene. So today, I'm going to dive into all the differences between the book Council of Elrond and the scene in the movie. We're going to cover glowing and the foreshadowing of the darkness in Moria, the character assassination of Boromir, as his attitude in the book is vastly different than that of the movie, and the other minor and major plot differences that affect the outcome of the entire saga. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 10 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, the show where I analyze the differences between the originals and the adaptations of your favorite fantasy franchises. I can't believe we're already to episode 10 of the series on Lord of the Rings, and I can't wait to do 100 more, or however many it takes to complete this series. Like I said, today we're going to be looking at one scene in the Fellowship of the Ring and comparing it to its corresponding chapter in the book. As always, I will analyze these works based on 4 categories of possible deviations, which are characters, timeline, location, and plot. Before we jump into the differences, let's refresh our memories on what takes place in this scene of the movie. So, the day after Frodo wakes up in Rivendell, we cut to the Council of Elrond. Multiple people groups of Middle-earth have been summoned to Rivendell to discuss the fate of the ring. Elrond introduces the doom of all people and then asks Frodo to present the ring. After he sets it on the stand, Boromir gets up and says that he had a dream, and inches towards the ring, but before he can touch it, Gandalf starts speaking in the Black Speech of Mordor, and tells everyone that one day this speech will be heard all across the land. But Boromir is persistent and says it is a gift and that the men of Gondor can use it against the enemy. Aragorn interjects and says that no one except Sauron himself can wield it, and Boromir immediately becomes irritated with who he thinks is just a simple ranger of no status. Legolas quickly corrects this by telling Boromir that this is indeed Aragorn, the rightful king of Gondor. Although shocked and surprised, Boromir resents this implication and says Gondor has no king, Gondor needs no king. Finally, Elrond speaks again and tells the council that they have one choice, which is to destroy the ring. Gimli jumps on the opportunity and gets blasted back after trying to chop the ring in half, and Elrond tells them that it can only be unmade in the fires of Mount Doom. The people of the council begin arguing amongst themselves about this difficult task and who should be responsible, and then Frodo steps forward and offers to take the ring to Mount Doom. Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, Aragorn, and Boromir all pledge themselves to aid Frodo in his journey, and then we find out that Sam, Merry, and Pippin have been snooping on the council and want to come along too. Finally, Elrond pronounces these 9 companions the Fellowship of the Ring, and the scene ends. So you're probably thinking, this is just one 8-minute scene. There can't be that many differences, right? Wrong. There are actually many changes that affect the themes, personalities, and overall plot of The Lord of the Rings. Plus, there is a lot of backstory and history we receive through this chapter that we don't get to hear in the film, like the dwarves retaking Moria, Gandalf's real encounter with Saruman, and the hunt for Gollum. So let's dive in by starting with our first 3 smaller categories of characters, timeline, and location changes. First up, our character differences are quite easy with one exception. Really, we see all of the characters Tolkien mentions, but not all of them speak like they do in the books. The characters that Tolkien writes about but don't have speaking parts, or just aren't identified in the movie, are Glowing, Erestor, Galdor, and Glorfindel. Obviously, you already know about the 9 members of the Fellowship and Elrond, so I won't go over all of them. Erestor was the chief counselor of Elrond, and Tolkien writes that he was seated next to him in the council, which makes me believe that it's this elf right here. Next, Galdor was sent by Círdan, the shipwright from the Grey Havens, who was one of the greatest of the elves and gave one of the 3 rings of power to Gandalf. We obviously already know Glorfindel, and I would assume that Glorfindel and Galdor would be these 2 elves next to Gandalf. Lastly, Glowing is Gimli's his father, and actually does all of the talking during the council for the dwarves, we can assume that he's one of the dwarves with Gimli. Now, to address the one exception, which actually is a pretty big deal. In the books, Bilbo was a part of the Council of Elrond, as Elrond and Gandalf have him recount his coming to find and obtain the ring and his use of it. Obviously, as you know in the movie, Bilbo is completely removed from the scene, as they have already made him look old and decrepit, which isn't accurate to the book. Okay, so now on to timeline. The only change is that the council really took all day long in the book, whereas in the movie, it's wrapped up in under 10 minutes. And as for location, that passes the test as this happened in Rivendell, and thankfully that was something Jackson didn't change. Before we jump into the plot changes, I want to remind you that you can claim a free audiobook on Audible using my link in the description. It supports the channel, and it helps you follow along with me in the series as I analyze the differences between the book and the movie. Let's head into our final category of plot changes and compare this scene with the corresponding chapter in the book. Believe me, there's a lot to cover, and I'll try my best to keep it in chronological order for you. First up, let's start with the very first thing that Elrond says in this scene of the movie, because it technically isn't true. Elrond says that everyone was summoned to Rivendell, when in the book, each representative for their people group was independently sent to seek advice from Elrond, one of the wisest beings in Middle-earth who is still accessible to people. Now keep in mind, Tolkien had a great handle on the idea of timing in his books, and we even hear that Boromir traveled for 111 days to get to Rivendell. This was common for those coming to visit Elrond, which meant that when they came, they usually stayed for quite some time, as it wouldn't be worth a weekend trip if it took you 100 days just to get there. So call it divine timing or whatever you want, but Elrond summoned the council on the 25th of October because Frodo had finally reached Rivendell with the ring, and all of the people groups of Middle-earth happened to be in Rivendell at the time. It was only logical that he would call all of them together and explain the reason for their problems, and then devise a way to resolve it. So moving on, before I jump into the differences with Boromir's character and his speech, I need to address something that was removed from the scene. In the book, we actually hear from Gloin first, who explains that not only have some dwarves been lost in Moria, but they have been approached by Sauron's representative multiple times. This messenger from Mordor has requested an alliance with the dwarves and asked for information on hobbits because Sauron knows that the dwarves knew a hobbit in the past, which is referring to Bilbo's adventure with Thorin. The dwarves had turned away this messenger multiple times, but he strongly hinted that he would be visiting one more time and was threatening in the way that he said it. So this prompted Gloin to seek the Council of Elrond. Elrond then takes the chance to explain that the council is here to decide the fate of Middle-earth, and as I mentioned earlier, he believes that there is some divine timing that all of these representatives happen to be in Rivendell at this time. Elrond goes on to explain the history of the ring, dating back thousands of years, and we don't get this in the movie because this has already been shown in the prologue of the film. However, one small difference is that he does mention how Isildur refused to destroy the ring the day that Sauron was defeated, because he took it as his payment for the death of his father and brother in the siege of Barad-dûr. They did not go up into the volcano of Mount Doom like they show in the movie. Next, Boromir interjects multiple times, and for the most part you can draw similarities between his words in the book and some of his lines in the movie. However, I want to point out a couple of key differences. First, Boromir makes it clear that his reason for being there is that he and his brother had the same prophetic dream in which he heard a poem about Isildur's bane, the sword that was broken, and a halfling. This is what brought him to seek the Council of Elrond. This is only briefly mentioned in the book, and later in the Two Towers, we see the scene of Denethor telling Boromir that Elrond was summoning a council, which we know didn't happen. Additionally, we learn that Boromir volunteered to go because he knew the journey would be treacherous and didn't want to put his brother in that situation, even though his brother had the same dream and could have gone. In the future scene in the Two Towers, Boromir is almost encouraging that Faramir could go in his place. Anyway, that is for a future episode, so for now, just know that Boromir is there because of a prophetic dream he had, not because Elrond summoned him. The other key change is that although Boromir is proud of his heroism and the strength of Gondor, he is open about them losing strength and hope, and when Aragorn reveals the sword that was broken to him and asks if he would want a king to return to Gondor, Boromir admits that it would strengthen his people if the sword of Elendil returned. Okay, so a couple of things to cover here. Aragorn in the film is scared of his destiny, whereas book Aragorn has carried around the shards of Narsil almost like he was waiting for this moment. Second, Boromir in the movie says Gondor has no king, Gondor needs no king, which almost directly contradicts his attitude in the book, which is open and almost encouraged by the thought that the heir of Isildur could return to the throne of Gondor and give hope back to their people. Another small change is that Legolas does not introduce Aragorn in the book, but it's actually Elrond who tells Boromir who the ranger is. Aragorn and Boromir kind of do get into it with each other when Boromir says that Gondor has been defending Middle-earth on the front lines of Mordor, but Aragorn says that the rangers do a lot of work too, but without the praise and behind the scenes. However, I do want to point out that it isn't as nearly hostile as it comes across in the movie. Next, in the book, Elrond has Bilbo, Frodo, and Gandalf recount their experience with the ring from the time that Bilbo found it in Gollum's cave to the time that Frodo crossed the Bruinen River. And Gandalf confirms that it is the One Ring because of the inscription he and Frodo saw on it when they put it in the fire at Bag End. They do this because the members of the council need convincing that this is indeed the One Ring. At this point, Galdor has interjected a couple of times, asking probing questions, which we don't get in the movie. After the story of the hunt for Gollum is explained by Aragorn and Gandalf, they mention that Gollum was left with the Wood Elves, but Legolas interjects and explains why he is in Rivendell. Evidently, he came to deliver the news that Gollum escaped from their imprisonment, and so now we know in the book why Legolas is at the council. Also, it's worth mentioning that Gandalf has explained to the whole council about the corruption of Saruman and his visit/imprisonment at Orthanc. He also mentions that Gwaihir bore him to Rohan after rescuing him, and that he was not welcomed in Edoras as the king had already been under Saruman's control at that point. Gandalf took the horse Shadowfax and left to come to Rivendell. Yes, this is the same Shadowfax that we meet in the Two Towers movie. Now that I've covered some of the book plot points and discussions, let me do a lightning round of some of the moments in this scene that never happen in the book. First, Boromir never reaches to touch the ring. Second, Gandalf never shouts the Black Speech of Mordor. Third, Gimli doesn't try to destroy the ring. In fact, he really doesn't speak at all. Fourth, Merry and Pippin aren't actually spying on the council, only Sam is. Lastly, the final change has to do with Frodo volunteering to take the ring. In the book, Bilbo is at the council, and after everyone has discussed their part and the ring has been proven to be the One Ring of Sauron, and they have concluded that the only way to defeat him is to destroy the ring, Bilbo actually steps forward and volunteers to take on the task. Boromir almost laughs at this point in the book, but stops himself after realizing that the rest of the council see this as a legitimate offer and truly respect Bilbo. Gandalf tells Bilbo that his part of the story is over and that the ring has been passed on. Everyone is reluctant to take the ring, and there is no moment of everyone starting to argue with each other. But after Frodo sits there for a bit, he realizes that this is his burden to bear, and he volunteers to take the ring. After this, Sam bursts out and says that he must go on the journey with Frodo, but there's no other moment of everyone nobly volunteering their weapons to his aid. Although I totally understand why they did this in the movie for the viewer, as it gives a visual representation of who the 9 companions will be, and it gives Elrond a chance to say the name of the movie. I think the main thing I take away from the book version of events is the overall portrayal of Boromir. The movie gives this extremely overt foreshadowing of his betrayal of Frodo and his attempt to take the ring. But in the book, Boromir is a nobleman of Gondor who is seeking advice and help. His land is on the front lines of the battle for Middle-earth, and he rightly states that his people are dying. But he is encouraged by the thought that Aragorn, the true heir to the throne of Gondor, could come to Minas Tirith and give hope to his people. He doesn't make rude remarks or try to take the ring outright in front of the council. His corruption by the ring takes place later in the story after some time has passed, whereas the movie gives this notion that he is already a weak and corrupted man at heart before he even arrives at Rivendell. This is a similar theme that carries through for his father as well, but we'll save that for a much later episode of this series. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these changes. As always, comment below what you like or dislike about Peter Jackson's version of the Council of Elrond, and don't forget to like and subscribe as I'm putting out new episodes every week for this series. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.